Okay, Lawrence, you said we're good to go?
Yep, it should be good. Let me unmute myself. Yes, we should be good.
Okay. All right, Alex, if we want to try it again.
Should I do I need to say all the things that I said before?
No, I think maybe if you just give a summary of what we've, what the item is.
Okay, great. So we're discussing the virtual. I guess we'll just open it. I am intending that assuming the board heard my statements, So I think if we could hear from Alexis about the financial impact of this or kind of the mechanisms involved with this, the possibility of this, I think that would be helpful.
Good morning, this is Alexis Schaus, I'm the Director of School Business. Yes, there is, this is a large number of students that is going to be, that is being requested, and it will have an impact on not just the charter schools and the school districts that the students would come from, but also will have a state budget impact for public schools as a whole. So just to kind of make sure everyone's aware of what our process is, all charter schools are treated the same way. They have set maximums, and our budgeting process starts actually back in October, where charter schools are allowed to request an increase to their maximums. And then in January, we in school business request each charter school to provide us a projected number of students that they think that they're going to have in the next coming year. And we ask them to provide us their maximum number. This may be less than the maximum they're allowed by law. Many of our charter schools are mature or they are at capacity for their buildings. And so they do put in a good projection. We have impressed on them the impact, the importance of a very accurate projection so that we can not only provide good information to all school districts on the number of students that they anticipate having, but also it ensures that we request the appropriate amount of funding from the General Assembly. We, of course, don't want to ask for too little, but we certainly don't want to tie up state funds unnecessarily with high projections that won't materialize. So anything over a 15% increase is, or rather anything under a 15% increase is budgeted in the state budget, and anything above that, we actually budget within the school districts, and we transfer those funds once we have the actual population. This 15% is not, it is not the same as the allowable maximums that they can go to. It does not correlate with their 20% maximums or their 30% maximum. It's really a budgeting number. So in June, kind of almost like in the last week of June, because we recognize in January when they give us our projections, they haven't had their lotteries and they haven't had their application process. And so in June, we request that they provide us a final projection, the maximum number of students that they will enroll. And we feel like by the end of June, they should, all units should have a pretty good idea of how many students they're going to have. They have to ensure that they have the staffing in place and the classroom space, etc. There is nothing that prohibits them from putting their full maximum, but most give us a pretty good number, and a handful will change their number from January, and that's fine. So we provide all this information to the school districts and tell them that they can anticipate having this impact on their school, their student numbers. So it's kind of this whole, it's kind of a, when the charter schools say, okay, we're going to increase by 100 students, and we provide that information to the school districts, they can plan to say, okay, well, we have to anticipate having a decrease of 100 students.
Alexis? Ashley, did you hear her that she cut out there?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, there she is, yeah.
Okay, so it's not always an actual decrease in the actual enrollment. It's just information so that they can plan, they take it to their county commissioners, they have good numbers. So that's the process, and we really stick to those rules. We apply them very consistently. For instance, we recently had a charter school that had put in 500 students as their maximum, and they requested that, well, if they have another 15 students, would they be funded for that? And our statement, as has been consistently applied, that no, your maximum that you put in is your 500 students, and it's just not, school districts and the charter schools around you cannot manage if we have this kind of, not a hard cutoff on the numbers. So we are in August now, and many of the school districts are planning for, a lot of the unknown. There is a lot of stress out there, especially regarding their student numbers, as it does impact their funding. And of course, being 90% personnel costs, it impacts their employments, right? So it's kind of late in the game, I would say. So the school districts, and this will impact the charter schools also. We have seen in the recent years, an increasing amount of transferring of students between the charter schools also. To Mr. Quigley's statement about the virtual schools, we did get, I think it was about 10 to 12 requests for new virtual schools in school districts. And these weren't just large school districts. Some of them were small school districts that they requested standalone virtual schools, and they were provided those. There is also, I think, almost many of the LEAs have virtual options within their schools. And so they do not have a separate school number, so it's harder to provide that information. But many of them have virtual options that they have created to accommodate this situation. So as we're going forward and we're looking at the impact of 2,000 students, which just for base numbers, we're looking that would be over $11 million. But you also have to consider that that's just base. We also have the exceptional children headcount, which would shift if there were exceptional children within that, which presumably there would be. And so those students would shift. There are, if the virtual schools are bringing on homeschool or private school students, we would not be funded for that. So then it becomes a bit of a state budget crunch, meaning they are not in our projections. The school would not be funded for any homeschool or private school students that are exceptional children. They would not get the supplemental funds. They would be eligible for the base funds, but not the supplemental funds for exceptional children. And at the same time that we're looking here, we're also looking to try and support the LEAs and charter schools with not bottoming out, meaning if they do lose students for homeschool, that we would the state board is, there's been a lot of conversation about requesting a hold harmless on their budgeted average daily membership. And in what form that takes and whether the General Assembly would approve that is up in the air. But these things, with having students moving and then funding them, we would be in effect funding more students twice at the state level, which becomes a budget issue. We only have so much budget within the state public school fund. The other thing with the virtual charter schools is that they are also adjusted in month 5. So if these students arrived in month 1, we would have that information. But if actually started their enrollment and membership and it impacted the month 5 adjustment for the virtual charter school, that it is something different for virtuals. I can't say at this time that we would have that funding available. If it was, if there were, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, I guess, in August with our actual students, but that is something that also would have, needs to just be kind of put there, because if they took these students and then we didn't have the funding, it would be obviously not good for the school. So, and we're often talking about the state funds, but this also will impact the federal funds. Any federal grant that is funded with by population, so that is Title I, EC, the IDA grants, as well as the CARES Act funds, they they have to, by federal law, be recalculated for new and growing charter schools. And because it is a pie, what it changes the shift. It will transfer the funds. It will reduce some charters and LEAs and move it over to the growing charters and LEAs. So that will also impact, I would anticipate, impact the federal grants that the school districts and the charters that are not virtual kind of are planning on. So those are kind of the main points, I think, on the impact on not only the individual public school unit budgets and information that they have, but also at the state budget level. And I'm happy to take any questions or go into something further.
What questions do folks have for Alexis?
This is Bruce Brent. I have a clarifying question. I got documents as it relates to the students on the wait list for the two virtual programs. Did I hear you correctly say that they would not get funded if those students are coming from a non-public setting right now? So would they not receive funding if the student was homeschooled last year or in a private school? Or does that not
Yes,
matter?
I think I realized when I spoke that there was probably going to be a confusion on that. So for the state-based funding, generally, if we have the funds, then it does not impact where the student has come from previously. That we will take that from our kind of contingency reserve, because obviously we didn't project out all those students, but for the state base, which is the 5,700 on average, that is funded. What is not is with the exceptional children funds, those are, we are funded based on a head count, and the head count is identified students. So in the first 60 days of the school year, charter schools can go in and claim their children who have exceptional needs from a database per se, if they have come from a school district, and we transfer the funds. However, if those students are coming from a private school or a home school, they were not in that head count, so there is no funds to transfer.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. My next question, and maybe it would come up for discussion later, Chairman Quigley, is just if I'm looking at our documents correctly, it looks like there's about 2888 students on wait list between these two schools. And I'm just curious as to what percentage of those students actually might be from non-public schools last year, as well as a breakdown of how that 2888 is across specific districts. I know they show it by region. I'm just curious as to the numbers by specific district.
Yeah, I think we could. I don't know if they gather that information in their application process. I get my understanding of the rationale was to provide an option for families that were attending districts that didn't have the scope of virtual services available, not necessarily to provide an opportunity for homeschool students who were previously homeschooled or whatnot. And on that note, Alexis, isn't there a tremendous, I understand that we do a lot of planning around the numbers, but isn't there just in reality a tremendous amount of uncertainty about how many kids are going to school? Like in general, I just feel like none of us, we all have done projections, but I just think everyone's projections right now, they could swing either way. I guess I'm kind of thinking, yes, it could be significant impact. But but it could also not be because there's a lot of uncertainty right now about how many students are going to show up to school. And also, districts are in schools are saving money, and if they're telling you that they're not, they're lying, because there is an element of costs that with transportation and things like that some of these costs will not have to. If you're doing a full remote plan, there are a number of costs you're not incurring. So there is an element of certain savings that are being seen in this situation.
Alex, I think I want to take exception to that, because every single penny I saved on buses, I had to put in the computers. I ended up having to give out 1,500 computers, and I didn't know I was going to need that many. So I haven't saved money.
Well, I guess I'm just saying there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the sector in terms of how many students are going to show up to school, and what are those costs? What is it going to look like? And I just don't. Is there a way for us to know? Is there a way for us to know if? I don't think we know how many kids are going to show up to school in the fall. Like real districts don't know, charter schools don't know. We could end up having a higher turnout on day one, because the requirements for counting a student as in present on day one is actually those requirements are frankly easier than having a student in the school building in some ways, because you can, based on the attendance guidelines, you can have a two-way contact and that student can be kind of present. And maybe there may be far fewer students. I just don't know.
Mr. Quigley, I think if I might just say, and I don't want to talk on behalf of all the school districts, but this is probably one of the biggest points of stress for the school districts is that the number of students, and it's not just the number of students as a whole, but the number of students by grade, the number of students. Some of these school districts are doing a kind of blended model of in-person and remote, which kind of doubles, triples their transportation costs. They do have more restrictions on their allocations than charter schools. They don't have it in one bucket. But there is to use the term stress, I think, is understating what is going out in the school districts, based on trying to plan their personnel and their budgets with a totally unknown situation coming up. So, I guess I'm just agreeing and supporting from what I've heard on the school district side. It's no different for the charter schools, obviously. Also, it's just, well, it's different. It's the same situation, but different impacts.
Yeah, and I obviously, I want to say, when I say, I want to retract what I said. If they say they're saving money, my apologies, Cheryl, they're lying. But I think what I'm trying to say is there is a lack of clarity in the cost associated with launching school, the number of students that are going to show. I mean, I am living this on a daily, hourly basis. The number of students that are going to come to school, the costs associated with it. And when you shut down multiple buildings across your whole district, there are some savings that you incur over the summer. There are also additional costs with getting school started again. So I think given why there's a lot of uncertainty. So I think it's hard. I guess what I'm getting at is how do we even know? I think part of what you were saying is this is going to be potentially have a big impact. A question that I have is just how do we even? It's hard for us to even know how much of an impact it's going to have, I guess.
So, Mr. Chair, this is Stephen Walker. As we talk about this, seems to be one thing we haven't talked about yet, and that is the student, which is the most important thing here. I mean, we could talk about how things are difficult on the LEA, We talk about how things are difficult on the money and how everything runs. But I think the biggest thing is these students. We've got wait list here of about 7,000 students for these schools. I don't know how many of those are overlapping. I'm sure there's some, but that 7,000, that's bigger than some of our LEAs are, of people that are trying to get into these schools because their parents have decided that that would be the best option for them. There are virtual academies in a lot of the LEAs, but some of them are unavailable for full-time instruction right now for these students because either they have some type of limits where they have, they'll allow 50 students or something like that, and they're full up, and so the students aren't able to go to that to get that full-time instruction. And I would say that, it depends on how you count a virtual academy. Some of them is just the same as the classroom teacher, and they just teach the lesson on Zoom in front of a whiteboard or whatever it is. I think that's a little bit different than what we're thinking. And then I'm not sure if the LEAs are going to, like Cheryl's doing, of getting those computers and getting them to the students and getting the internet to the students. I'm not sure if the LEAs are going to do that. I think in a situation like this where everything is so fluid and everything is so up in the air, we've got to give as many options as we can. The option I think a lot of parents wanted was plan A, where they felt comfortable with their kids going back to school. That option was totally taken off the table. And so they're scrambling to try to find something, and they want some kind of stability for their kids. And the students want some stability too. And I think by doing this, we offer them up some of that stability for them to have it. We're talking about a 1-year deal here, and then things move back. I know things are stressful. I know things are crazy, but I think we've got to give an option for these students that want it. And I think that's one of the things we have to remember as Charter School Advisory Board is that we're about the students. We're about innovation, about taking care of the educational needs of children, especially with students that are EC students. You've got these virtual academies that have figured out how to do it. They get, they have people actually go into the homes to help out when it's needed. Therapists go into the homes, things like that. And I think this is an option that we need to open up for students that they don't have full-time virtual instruction available to them through the LEA, or the LEA cannot or will not provide internet or computers for them as the virtual charter schools will do. And I think we need to move forward with this. And it's a 1-year thing. Everything's different this year, and I think we need to open this up.
Could we have David Stegall or Dr. Emery comment?
Hey, Alex, this is David Stegall, Deputy Superintendent at DPI. I want to reiterate what Mr. Walker just said. Our goal is, first and foremost, to support every child effectively. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. We also need to create and maintain infrastructure to sustain public education as a whole. We can't dismantle the entity for a stopgap, and I want to make sure we don't rush into a solution that isn't sustainable over time and that may disregard the needs long-term of all districts and all schools. But options are important. I agree wholeheartedly. Charter schools have served a tremendous role. Parents have many options in North Carolina. That's just one of the strengths of our state, is that you can find the fit that meets your family's needs. And I 100% agree with that. But we don't want to dismantle public education in the chaos as well. I want to seek to not harm any PSU to benefit another, short-term or long-term. So some questions and concerns I have is, as Alexis has shared, the money follows the student. We have a lot of uncertainty right now. 10 months is a long period of time. We don't know what will happen long-term with the virus, with vaccines, with students, with schools opening up back to A, as you mentioned earlier. If a student goes to a virtual environment and we release 7,000 students in a virtual environment, and then January, November, whatever time period, we go into A, and students have the option of going back in the building, and their parents would rather have that option because it is their primary choice, as you mentioned, that's their first choice, and they go back to their home school, home charter, whatever it may be, the PSU. that money does not follow the child back. That money is gone to an environment that won't be serving the students long term. I have concerns with that. The accountability, there was questions about accountability, waiving accountability for these charters, virtual charters in the meantime. That's a federal requirement, so that's, I just want to clarify, that's not an option. The accountability is with the student wherever they're served, and that's a federal requirement. I do have concerns that both of these virtual environments have performance ratings of D. It does concern me that they are not high-performing charter schools, and having 7,000 students going into low-performing schools and districts is concerning. I'm not saying the infrastructure is not being put in place and support's not being put in place, but the data shows that these are not high-performing districts or high-performing schools. That's a concern. I also have a concern finding teachers that are qualified and trained. You're exactly right. Virtual environment, the pedagogy involved with that is extremely specific. I've taught at the university level on working in a remote environment and blended learning. It is completely different pedagogy. Engagement's very different. I have to ponder how many of those teachers will be trained and ready to go from day one in that type of environment. You mentioned about 1 year engagement of students and then send them back. How do we disengage with students who are in the school? Are we going to tell them they're no longer allowed to come to that school? So if we did say, we're going to allow these students into a virtual charter, and a year from now they say, this is a long-term fit for us, are we going to tell those students they have to leave and kick them out? Is that good long-term for students? I would question that, personally. Alex, you made some great points early on that I think I don't want us to gloss over. Remote is offered in most, if not all, districts. The ones that it's not offered in, it has very much to do with infrastructure. Dr. Emery and I and many others on this call have, for the most part, we've gone weekly or biweekly conversations with charter leaders and with superintendents. And the biggest need is infrastructure. And it's not just devices or hotspots. You talk to Swain County, that 40% of their county doesn't even have internet or cell phone service. So my question would be, if I have a student from these counties where they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have internet, they don't have cell service, how would we resolve that issue if a child wants to come to a virtual charter? But you mentioned you provide infrastructure. I'd love to hear how that works and learn more about that. And Alex, to your point earlier, the number of LEAs that aren't currently offering Plan C or a virtual, some form of virtual offering, the number of students on the wait list seems to be about 12. It's less than 50, it's safe to say. That's a very different number than 7,000. And again, the 7,000 may include homeschools, private schools, other things, which it would be good to know about, because we certainly, my first point is the most important. We want to support every student effectively, long-term, not just in a crisis, a long-term, and set them on the path and keep them on the path to do well, not just to check a box that we gave them instruction for a period of time. We want to engage them and help them move forward. And so to me, the infrastructure matters, the quality matters, the sustainability matters. And so those are the key points. Money is money. We'll serve students regardless of, all of us. We've all committed this as our charge. We're going to do whatever's necessary to engage these students. But we can't jumble everything up just for a short period of time and not be farsight, not be visionary. I have foresight to think about this, not just for 4 months or 12 months, but for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. We want this to be something that provides and maintains a solution that we can commit to long term. So sorry if I sound a little bit preachy. Just like all of you, I'm passionate about getting this right, not getting it quick, but getting it right, and not making a rash decision that may sound pleasing to some for a short period of time, but a long term might not benefit students. And that's our major focus. So I appreciate the time to share my thoughts.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question for Dr. Stigall. I can go ahead with that. Okay, I got a thumbs up. You talked about dismantling public education. You would agree that the virtual charter schools are part of the public education system, correct?
Well, yes, sir, 100%.
Okay, I mean, I'm just not sure. That's just something I hear a lot from the people that don't like charter schools, is that they're part of a private education system rather than the public education system. But one thing I'd point out is here. We've got these virtual charter schools, and I've been as disappointed as anybody with the performance that we've seen. But there's 8 school districts in 1819 that were low-performing districts because they had more than 50% of their schools were low-performing. That's Edgecombe, Martin, Nash, Rocky Mount, Northampton, Robinson, Scotland, Terrell, and Weldon City. And they have 52,000 students, and they are going to open up virtual academies. And here we've got 2 virtual schools that have been doing this. I would say that they're probably well ahead of the game of what a lot of these LEAs would be in a virtual academy. And I don't know why we'd want to deny these students the opportunity to be able to do it if that's what their parents decides best.
Yeah, and I want to clarify, you're exactly right. We want what, I'm not, it's not about picking sides or picking one greater than the other. We're all part of the solution, and you're exactly right. And I do think that part of the solution for our state is also the options of homeschool and for private school. I think parents need fits. That's what makes our state great. We have plenty of options. So I don't want to exacerbate the situation by making one seem more superior or inferior to the other. That's not my intent at all. It's that we have to look at the full picture. And you're exactly right. We have low performing districts that serve large number of students. We have teams of staff that work with those. We want those school districts to show growth. And again, as I mentioned before, I don't know enough about the virtual environments, that your 2 schools in particular, about their performance grades to be able to assess and speak intelligently about what's led to those D ratings. I don't know. That's why I said I'd like to know more about it as we make these decisions. I think that's an important discussion.
I think just to focus our conversation, so we've heard from Alexis, and I think we might have to circle back with her. I think what some things that we know that the accountability would have to be absorbed by the school. I do think there's the issue that you raised about students. What would you do with them? But I think I do think that there's so much uncertainty for parents that in many ways a lot of parents are in the driver's seat. They in some ways they have more choices now. They can choose between hybrid. They can choose a virtual academy in a district. They can choose to homeschool. Parents have more choices now than they've ever had because districts are offering more choices because they have to. And I think that parents are smart and they know what's best for their kids. And so if they decided, hey, I'm willing to go into this virtual academy for a year, knowing that next year I got to figure it all out again, I think parents are kind of like, I don't know what next year is going to look like. I'm just trying to think about how do I get to 5 p.m. right now with my kid. And so I think I think in other circumstances, sure, a long-term solution would be what we would drive for, but that doesn't seem like any district is offering and no one is offering a long-term solution. I mean, I've told my parents this is what it is for a quarter. That's all they know. I don't know what it's going to look like after October 16th, but I'll let you know as soon as I do. So I do think saying I tend to want to default to what do parents want for their kid because they are in the best position and know what is best for their kid. So I don't think it's as big of a deal as it normally is to say, you're going back, and even if it works out for you, you're going back into the lottery, and in the virtuals would have to know you're getting reset back to your original number. That being said, I want to be clear on what question or what are we trying to solve here, because we're talking about wait lists of 7,000. I think we all know that that's not the number we're talking about. I think it's important, and maybe this is an Alexis question, what's the difference between 500 students total or 50 students total? Because if, you put some limitations on the requirements for who is eligible to come off the wait list, and you're talking about a far reduced number. And I guess, I'm interested in what other board members feel is I think we're kind of struggling a little bit because how many students are we really talking about moving around? And maybe to Alexis, it doesn't matter if it's 5 or if it's 500. I don't know if I have a question there. I'm just like, what is the real? I think we're gonna waste time if we're talking about 7,000 kids because we all know that ain't happening.
Alex, when I looked at the proposal that the schools put in, they were each talking about 2,000 kids. Well, that's doubling the size of their school, and school starts in 3 days. I just don't see how you can make that happen and make it happen effectively.
I would agree.
So if we're going to do this, I think we have to limit the numbers. I don't think we can say you can go double your school and next year we're going to make half of them go away.
This is Mr. Chairman, this is Bruce. Yeah, I guess I have a question too, and I don't know if I can word it as a question, but it's just a curiosity of how real those waitlist numbers really are, because, you know, I think my own charter school here, you know, I've got a wait list right now of 500, but it's probably really not 500 because I'm sure many of those 500, without telling us, have already found another solution. And so, and I think that's particularly true if that wait list is out, whatever the number is. I mean, if many of those students are in districts that have virtual academies, like, do we really know what that, like, to your point, do we really know what that number is? That's kind of what I'm wrestling with in terms, and we may never know what that number really is. As many of you probably know, I have a pretty long history in virtual education in the country, and you know, my gut is providing parents choice, and I'm a full supporter of virtual schools being that choice. But this also does raise for me a lot of questions about how real are those numbers? What does happen a year from now, as Ms. Turner just points out, for the families who, oh, they really like this, but now it's not an option to them. And, where are the teachers based and how they're getting them up and ready before next week? Are they even based in North Carolina? I just have a lot of questions. I mean, could I, you know, if I had, you know, they're a charter school, we represent charter schools. I mean, if I can assure you that if I was allowed to increase my enrollment this year, I could have had many students and families who would have come to our school for the full-time virtual option that we're providing. But I don't have that option because I have a cap. And you know, or is it, if we're going to raise the enrollment opportunities for these two virtual schools, again, which I'm not necessarily opposed to doing, but do other charters that are also offering full-time virtual, do we get that same option? Because I'd like to partake of that option. I'm ready to open my doors next week with teachers who are ready to go and teach kids online fully. So.
Right, and you could absorb, you know, 20 more students per class for a year, you know, as long as they don't come in person.
Easily. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and again, I want to preface this, I sit here shaking my head in agreement too with comments from Mr. Walker as well. I'm by nature a supporter of virtual education options. I mean, at the same time though, if this were just a charter school that had growth and grades that was have had, would we be even entertaining the idea of increasing enrollment? And I say that not to be critical, but those are just the thoughts that are going through my head as I listen and think about this debate.
I think, Bruce, there's one thing I would say that, you know, about the other charter schools in this situation is that most of them are doing a virtual option for their students right now. Come January, come December, you know, as Alex said, this is for a quarter. If the coronavirus has tapered off and the powers that be decide it's okay for students to come back to school and to go in there, I would be curious as to how many charter schools are deciding that they're going to do a dual thing and they're going to have half their students in classrooms and half of them continue virtual, whereas the virtual charter schools, they're going to stay virtual.
I think that's a fair point, Mr. Walker. I would just say that I'll speak on behalf of the one school I know a lot about, which is the one I'm sitting in right now. And that is, you know, if I had the option to have students enrolled fully online, even if we do get to go back to Plan A and those parents wanted to stick with fully online, I'd welcome the opportunity to continue serving them in that capacity. And I realize other schools may not.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to just make a couple comments about all this as well. Yeah, I agree. I think I mean, the whole reason for charter schools is to provide a choice. But I also think, I know we're in a pandemic and everything's kind of changing every day. But I also think there should have been more planning on the front end of this. And I agree with Cheryl Turner in that doubling your size is a huge undertaking in a short period of time. And again, with everything happening and everything changing constantly, what happens, you know, like you had said, Mr. Quigley, that you only know up to your first quarter what you're doing. So what happens when things change in the next quarter? Are all these students then going to vacate because they're going to go back to their home school? I mean, I think it can create just a lot of infrastructure issues. And also to Dr. Segal's point, this still isn't really going to address the needs of the students that have no infrastructure and have no access to internet. So I'm really concerned about making such a large increase in enrollment for these virtual charters.
Would it be useful, could we hear from someone from North Carolina Virtual Academy and from CCA, what is the can you be real, give us an actual number, in an honest kind of appraisal of the number of students that you would be able to absorb? Because if you say 2,000, I'll just say I'll probably won't believe you.
Mr. Hill, are you on the line where you can answer that question for Chairman quickly?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, sure can.
So last year we enrolled 2,300 kids. Our proposal is to go from 2,300 to 3,300. We're not seeking to double our enrollment. We're seeking to increase by 1,000. That number is frankly based on a conversation or multiple conversations I've had with our principals at the elementary, middle, and high school. We looked at our capacity by each individual grade based on our current teaching resources, and that number is also based on us having increased a contract with a firm called Edgenuity. So we are hiring both NCCA teachers and providing additional instructional services through Edgenuity. So we have a waiting list today that approaches 3,000, but we wanted to be thoughtful and strategic and realistic about the resources that we would need to acquire, not only with regards to teaching services, but with regards to purchasing laptops. And this summer, we're providing training to our teachers and also to our learning coaches. So we were concerned about bringing on so many new additional kids, and it would disrupt our ability to continue to provide capacity and training for our teachers and learning coaches. And so, again, we had a robust conversation and figured that 1,000 is our capacity, and that we would be able to start school with these additional kids on August 24th.
Martez, I have a question for you. How many students have y'all had to turn away because even though they were in a rural area, you weren't able to somehow get them internet, whether it be through a hotspot, satellite, or something like that?
I'm not aware that we've turned away any child because of their inability to access the internet. You know, frankly, one thing that we've done over the last year is use our resources to provide laptops and hotspots to families that may not have had those resources. And so, I mean, that is specifically a desire that the board has had, and we're going to continue to move forward in that direction. I mean, we've actually ordered roughly 500 additional laptops, and if our number goes up by 1,000, we will order maybe about 300 or 400 more.
Mr. Chairman, this is Joel Ford, and I got a question.
I think Alex had to get off, and he's
Okay.
going to try to log back in.
All right, so I want to make sure, Mr. Machado, from a staff verification standpoint, if that's possible, that they have the infrastructure resources to be able to execute on what it is that they say that they can do. And so I'm coming at this from a parent standpoint, right? And I'm coming at this from a board standpoint of a board trying to make a decision ultimately to empower parents with options in this educational space during a pandemic. But one of the things that I think that we are fighting against is several things: fear, misinformation, and a lack of transparency about what it is that we're trying to do for their kids educationally. I think as an organization, if we could help alleviate some of the fear with the information that we have, and then some of the verification information that we have to empower parents so that they can make the best decision for their child, I think that that's really, at this particular point, at this particular hour, which is all that we can do.
Mr. Ford, I'll try to answer that question. I think you directed towards me and the Office of Charter School. Our office cannot verify as far as us going into the schools and proving that they are capable of increasing the numbers that they are. We have to go by what they are telling us. I have a lot of confidence in both these leaders, so I have to assume that they know better than obviously our office does whether they can accommodate them. I have told several people the last couple of weeks in this conversation that I have more confidence in these two schools operationally than I've had since I've been in this position. But we have to rely on both Mr. Martez and the leader at NCVA are telling us. I hope that answered your question.
That answers it a lot, Mr. Machado, because again, the average parent doesn't have any of that. And that's what I'm trying to convey, is because of the misinformation and because of the fear, all we can do is share with them the information that we have to empower families so that they can make the best decision for their child. And then on our side, I think we have to be realistic about not allowing any organization to overpromise and underdeliver. At this particular point, from what I'm hearing from everybody on the phone, we are really trying to do our best to grasp at something realistic and then really entrust that they're going to be able to deliver on the educational options that they say that they can do. That was my point.
I had to log off because I was not here. Did Sam Hammergren say how many students they could absorb?
So I answered the question on behalf of NCCA that we believe we can absorb an additional 1,000 students. We served 2,300 students last year, in this upcoming year, we believe, based on our current staffing and our contract with other organizations, we can absorb an additional 1,000. And that I had talked to each of our principals to get them to define by grade level the number of students each grade level teacher could instruct throughout the school year.
Well, and you would be, even if 1,000 of those students are on a 1-year waiver where they have to reapply for the lottery, you'd still do it?
Well, that's a really good question. I think we'll just try to take this one day at a time. I think one concern though is how the funding would come to our school, because there are going to be some additional costs associated with enrolling 1,000 students. We're going to have to purchase additional laptops. Even though we think that we could reach the 3,300 with our existing staff, out of the abundance of caution, we would want to hire some additional EC teachers to comply with federal requirements. We would want to hire a few more core content teachers in middle and high school, because we don't want to literally get up to the edge of the 1 to 50 requirement and life happens. We lose a teacher because of attrition, and then one of those classes or several of those classes would double in size. The cost that we're going to have to incur, and we want to budget appropriately.
Is there somebody from NTVA on? Ms. Becerra?
Alex, I asked, she was not sure if she would be able to make it because they were having professional development for teachers all week. I do not see her on here. Lauren, are you on here? Yeah, I don't believe
she is. No, I'm sorry. She is not. She has texted me several times to answer some questions, but she is not on the line because they are in professional development today.
Did she message you? Okay. I mean, I guess I find that interesting that they're not on this call. If it's, yeah. Okay. I guess what other information does the board feel like we need at this time to consider this seriously and make a recommendation to the state board?
Mr. Quigley, I have a concern in how that additional 1,000 students would affect the performance. They're low performing, both schools obviously, as noted, and then taking on an extra 1,000 students, how's that going to impact the fact that they could possibly improve their performance?
Okay. Yeah. I think part of the counter argument is that we're measuring them against kind of an unproven district model of remote learning, and what is I did some math there, and if this is true, so there's less than 50. There's actually only 12 students on the NCVA wait list. They're the only ones that break it down by actual counties, who have counties that are not offering a remote learning option and not offering a virtual academy. There's 619 students on NCVA's wait list. If you were to count all the students all the districts, if students who are in a district that's not offering a virtual academy. So I think my question is, if we're going to put, and I think for the state board to approve this, they would probably want to see a couple stipulations. One, that the money goes back to the district however difficult that is, if the student leaves. Two, that there are waivers for, so that those students have to re-lottery. I don't even know if the virtual academies would want that. It seems like there's some degree of trepidation there. And three, that I think the state board would be asking for some kind of limiting factor on where the students are coming from. So if you were to go with, you know, it seems like it would probably be 1,000 students total between the two schools, probably less. If you were to just look at the ones that who would be applying from districts that don't have a virtual academy, and it would probably be would certainly be less than that if you were talking about districts that don't have remote learning operational. So I'm trying to figure out how do we shape this recommendation if it is moving forward, but if the, you know, certain, so I guess I just want to kind of hear where people's heads are. Cheryl, you haven't talked much, but I know you probably have some thoughts. I think we heard from Stephen, heard just now from Joel. Cheryl, could you maybe share?
And Alex, that was Hilda before. About the numbers, 1,000.
Pointing out, I was having technical difficulties, so I could not hear what Joel's comments were. So maybe you could give me a little refresher on that when I finish speaking. I'm really torn on what to do. On the one hand, as Stephen says, you know, it's all about the students. And clearly we're all in this business because they are our number one concern. But on the other hand, I have trepidation about making this last minute change, especially with such a large number, because I know how it is going to impact not just these kids that we're talking about on the waiting list, but all students and all PSUs across North Carolina. We did start back to school this week. We, for the past several years, have averaged about 540 students. Based on our current plan, we are doing A day, B day, plus a virtual piece for those families. We've had a huge increase in the number of families that have requested to be all virtual. And it's where you think there might be cost savings, we've had cost increase. We've had to have more devices, like Cheryl said, even though we were a one-to-one school. But even with the spring, when we sent kids home, we didn't get our devices back. Pieces came back broken. We had to buy new bags because, you know, you want to have fresh, clean options for the students. All the increases in cleaning and mask and, you know, just all that. Plus our services were being strained. Our teachers are being asked to teach virtually as well as an A group and a B group, so it takes a lot more planning. I mean, it's just, from us personally, we've been impacted with the less enrollment. So, I mean, I see both sides, and I'm just really, I'm really torn. I at this point, I feel like adding 1,000 students to one of the academies is just a bad idea. And I really, that's where I stand.
So you missed my comments. This is Joel Ford, and my family and I, we're currently living this experiment with Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, right? So listening here this morning, and I'm taking from my own public school experience, nobody has figured this out during the pandemic. And I think, Mr. Chairman, that it's unfair for us as a board to think that we can figure this out or that we have figured this out during the education during the pandemic. It ain't happening. But what I do believe that we can do as a board is to do our best assessment and be transparent with parents about what their options are. And I've grown to trust and respect not only the staff, but my colleagues on the board about what is realistic, what can be realistically done to educate students not only in the classroom, but also from a virtual standpoint. And so I just want us to not try to overdo it, but to be realistic about what it is that we can do, be honest and transparent about it, and then entrust that our parents are going to be able to make the decisions that is best for their child. My last point is this. We are in some unprecedented times, and I think it's important for us to understand that we are trying to do the best that we can for a group of young people who really have not had an opportunity to get started yet. And I don't think this is going to be the last decision, Mr. Chairman. I believe that we're going to have to revisit this, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I really do believe that we have to do something and to not be paralyzed by fear.
Thanks, Mr. Ford. Ms. Turner?
Yeah. I am particularly sensitive to parents who are not comfortable with their kids going into buildings and have no other choice because for whatever reason their district has not, or their district or their charter or wherever they are, has not offered a full remote opportunity. I would like to see us be able to offer that opportunity so that at least everybody has a choice between sending kids into the building and not sending their kids into the building. I do not think that all 7,000 of those students are in that situation. And I don't see, school starts on Monday. I just don't see how anybody can think that they could have that ready to go by Monday. So, okay, so a week from Monday, you've got to buy more devices. When do those kids get pulled in? When they get pulled in, how is that made up, the time that they missed? That's a lot of kids. And I would like to see us make an opportunity for kids who don't have another option. I don't necessarily think that just before school starts, it's time to open the whole thing up and say, well, we decided we like this better. We applied and didn't get in, but now we should open it up and anybody who wants to go can go.
Okay. So are we ready for a motion of some kind? Sounds like
Mr.
not.
Chair, I'll
So,
have
Mr.
to
Chairman,
make a
what is
motion.
the ask again?
The ask is the state for us to make a recommendation to the state board about whether or not the virtual charter schools can increase their enrollment for 1 year to accommodate additional students in the pandemic as a virtual option. And the number, I think, is important.
Right. That's what I was trying to get to, the quantifiable number.
Well, I think there's a variety, you could put an arbitrary number, or you could base it on the districts that are not offering a virtual option of some kind. I think the state board is probably going to take whatever we recommend and work with to a point that they feel comfortable.
So does the staff have a recommendation?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Mr. Ford, when you say staff, are you talking about the Officer Charter School?
Yes, sir. I'm talking about the Office of Charter School.
Okay. To answer that question, I don't necessarily have a recommendation. My concern is this 1 year increase, and is it actually legal to enroll students for 1 year and then unenroll them? That's what really concerns me. But I believe strongly in giving parents a choice. I am a little concerned at the late time that this is happening, but I do not have a recommendation.
All right, so Mr. Chairman, that puts us in a very unique situation here, and quite honestly, as a volunteer board member, I really feel that I'm at a disadvantage as a board member, and I'll tell you why. I was really hoping that our staff members would have a better handle on this, and it's not a point of criticism or fault. It just goes to show you how difficult this decision is and how we are truly in some uncharted waters. And go ahead.
This is Joe Mamoni. I'm sorry to chime in, but Ashley, if you can put up slides 3 and 4 in the PowerPoint presentation, there's recommendations from the virtual schools, what they feel their maximum capacity could be. So if there's going to be any motion at all, it makes sense that we would look at those numbers as part of that recommendation.
And I respect that, but I was looking for a outside objective point of view. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think this is obviously a reference point that we could go from. But again, even looking at this, so the question is, what do we believe realistically can be effectively executed upon, right?
Rick, sure.
Mr. Chair, I don't want us to get to this is Stephen Walker. I don't want us to get to the point where we try to, micromanage the situation. And I think Mr. Ford's point's very well taken, especially, before when, he was talking about us feeling like we can figure it all out, because I think that's something that's going to be very difficult for us to do. I think here, offering these options is really what we need to do. I think I think the Office of Charter Schools is in a interesting situation, but and I think we all are, because the question we all have is this going to work? And because we're in uncharted territory here, we've never handled anything like this before, and so that's why we're kind of in that weird situation. To me, it makes sense, and I'm happy to make a motion for this, because I think we've got to come to some sort of resolution pretty quickly here. And so my understanding, Cyber feels like they can have an additional 1,000 students. And Ashley, on the next slide, what is it for a virtual? They can do an additional 2,800 students. I think whether that's too high, too low, whatever, I think it's, even if these students are starting a week later, that's better than them not starting at all or not having that option. And so I would move that we recommend to the state board that Virtual Academy and the and Cyber Academy be able to increase their enrollment growth by their projected capacity to be able to do so. For those students that are unavailable, for those students that do not have a virtual academy that is available for full-time instruction to them. So if it's full up and they can't go, they're eligible for it. They're eligible for it if their LEA does not offer something. And also for those students that the LEA cannot or will not provide the laptops or the computers for, and also with the caveat that the money will follow the child, as we previously discussed. So that would be my motion.
All right.
Get a clarifying, can I get a clarification, Mr. Clinton?
Yeah, go ahead, Sharon.
So Stephen, in the motion, you're recommending that we allow cyber to grow by 1,000 students and virtual by 2,800.
If those students meet those criteria, there may not be enough students that meet the criteria of not having a virtual academy available for full-time instruction or being able to get the internet or the computers from the LEA. So, I mean, that's kind of a ceiling, but it's not. It's definitely not for sure that this is how many students they're going to get. From what we're discussing, it may be 500 students, it may be 1,000 students, it may be the 3,800 students. I think we don't know, but I think it's, so if the student meets that criteria, that they'd be able to go into the virtual school.
Again, the stipulation is that there's no virtual option available to them through their LEA.
Right, but I guess the question that I would have is in the details.
How do we determine that?
Yeah, well, would that include a district that, so if they're offering a remote, if they're in Plan C, they technically have that option available?
Of course, there may be students there that the LEA has said, we're not going to provide you with the internet or the laptop, so those students would still be eligible.
When we did our remote plan, not providing devices and internet was not an option.
That.
So if this is Bruce, just to clarify my understanding, with the caveats to this motion that the only additional students these two cybers could enroll over the next school year, was if the student came from a district where the virtual option, full-time virtual option is not currently an option, and or the local LEA is not providing a laptop or internet. So it's going to require each of these two virtual schools to look at their waiting list and basically go back and, I guess, poll every student on the waiting list to see if indeed they're eligible based upon those criteria. Is that correct?
I would think that would be correct, and I think it's not only, I think it's important to make it clear that if it's unavailable for that student. So I know some of these LEAs are having virtual academies, and maybe they saying, but we're only going to have 100 students in it. And if you're the 101st student, you would be eligible as well.
I want to be real clear about what it sounds like a substitute motion is being offered. I just want to be clear, and I want to reiterate, no one outside of these virtual academies has any real experience in this space, right? Our local LEAs have their traditional model of teaching in person in a classroom. So I just want to be careful about trying to put an unrealistic expectation on these virtual and cyber academies. And when our parents don't have any more confidence or any more experience with their LEAs in this virtual educational space. So let's be mindful of that.
Mr. Chair, I think I still need a second on this motion if there's going to be one.
I'll second it.
I'm sorry, I was for some reason unable to unmute. Okay, so it's been properly moved in second. Any discussion?
Chairman Quigley, this is Dave Machado again. I'd like to have some clarification. Mr. Walker, is your motion giving enrollment preference that is not given by the General Assembly?
I don't know if it's necessarily giving enrollment preference. It's just setting out a pool of students. It's almost like you have two wait lists. And, I think they have the ability to do this. But that would be something that I would let legal weigh in on, when the state board looks at it.
Let me be clear, Mr. Machado and Mr. Chairman. I thought that my motion that I'm supporting, the way that I interpret it to be, is to create additional capacity, right, for cyber and for virtual academy.
True, but I think one of the and part of the reason why I think this is so difficult is that, well, one, we're having a lot of audio issue. I also think this is late in the game. Whereas if they had put these requests in back in May, knowing that they were going to have an increase in applications, it would have been a lot easier. I do think part of it is everything has been late in the game. The announcement of how we were going to open school came pretty late. I am concerned that one, as much as I think the state board would want to agree to the kind of parameters that you're suggesting, Stephen, I'm concerned that it might be legally difficult and then also operationally difficult for the schools. It might be a lot cleaner to just say they're allotted a one-time increase of 10% of their enrollment, and to accommodate students to accommodate a reasonable number of students who would like to select this option, and any of those students will have to reapply for the lottery next year. If I were them, I wouldn't want 2,800 students that would reapply, and I do think that that's going to end up being a criteria. So I'm not making a motion. I'm just kind of trying to think about the difficulties in this, and sometimes it's kind of like if we can't make it work.
So since I'm the seconder of the motion, Mr. Chairman, I have a question. If we don't approve this, are there kids out there that will not be served as a result of us not expanding the virtual and cyber academies?
Well, there will be kids who are on the wait list for this, who parents have. They have a lot of students on the wait list. So, we can make the case that any student on a wait list is not being served in the way that their parents would most prefer them, I guess.
So my question is, how do we pick and choose as a board who gets in?
Therein lies the problem. I think that historically preferences and weighted lotteries and things have certainly been designed to provide an opportunity to those that might not otherwise get it. And on some level, that's what we're trying to do here. But I think the issue, we're trying to provide an opportunity in a kind of unique circumstance that potentially they might not have in the district.
So realistically speaking, even though we were trying to, at the original motion, to present Virtual Academy with an additional 2,800 seat capacity for students, realistically, a parent could choose not to go to that Virtual Academy, correct? Because my point is, if we are empowering parents and putting students first, we're giving them a choice. Right now, they don't have a choice. And so 2,800 may not be the optimum or ideal number, but there's no guarantee that they're going to receive 2,800 students. Am I missing something here?
No. I mean, I think they would receive far less, particularly if the parameters that are included in Stephen's motion, there's no way that they would hit that number. Based on my kind of back in the hand calculations, there's no way they would hit those numbers. I think there's also a larger question of, we heard from Alexis and DPI, and you might be able to have a recommendation from the deputy state superintendent, but I think the general sentiment, and they should feel free to jump in, but the sentiment was it's going to be operationally very difficult and potentially frustrating to districts and charters if there's a significant swing in the number of students. So some of the benefit of capping the number of students that would newly enroll in these schools, whether it be by the kind of district available options or just an arbitrary number, would be to prevent and allow the DPI and districts to kind of manage for the potential shifts, if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair, this is
Go
Bruce.
ahead.
Yeah, and actually, it's Stephen. The question is actually for you. I'm sorry, I had audio problems. I didn't hear your response earlier. I just want to, what I'm really wanting to make sure I'm clear specific to the motion that's granted or on the table. The motion on the table is to allow them to increase with the caveats that the students that they enroll over and above their current cap can only be in a district where there's not a full-time virtual option available to them and or that local LEA is not providing them a laptop or the internet to participate in that option. And so if I'm understanding those parameters correctly, my first question is A, am I understanding those parameters correctly? And B is who determines that? Because that to me seems like a lot of work for the two cyber schools to have to even further vet who's on their wait list, because as Alex just pointed out, there's no way that all the kids on the wait list meet that criteria. I would venture to say that probably more than half of them don't even meet that criteria.
Yeah, okay, so Bruce, as to your first question, yeah, you're understanding that correctly. And for number two, I don't think it'll be that difficult just because, we know there's 40 some LEAs that don't have it at all. So that right there, you have it. And then others, if the parents, certify to them, hey, I tried to get into our virtual academy, couldn't get into it, and so want to come here, then that takes care of that problem as well. I don't think it'll be too difficult for them to do. On the, they're pretty good at working with data and with a large number of students. I think they can handle it. Number two, just for Alex and everybody else, my understanding is that I don't think that the virtual academies really came with this idea. I think it came from a committee on the state board, the virtual learning committee, or not the virtual learning, or the virtual learning charter school committee. They were all talking about it and then decided they wanted to have us weigh in on it. And I think it was something that's been in discussions for about a month with the state board, and with everything going on as far as not knowing what the plan was going to be for the schools. I think it took a little while for it to actually get brought up for discussion. And when it got brought up for discussion, they wanted us, and that's why we called this meeting quickly, or that's why, Alex called the meeting quickly to go ahead and have us weigh in on it. And so I think, yeah, it would have been ideal, but it also would have been ideal for us to know at the end of May or the first part of June what the plan for schools were going to be. And it was delayed constantly. And so we're kind of in this situation now where everybody's scrambling to try to get everything done. But I think everything's pretty clear now. And we don't get paid on this board, but we still have to make the tough decisions, or at least the recommendations. We don't have any power, but I think this is a good recommendation, and I hope that everybody will support it.
Mr. Walker and Mr. Chairman, I'll be quiet after this. This is Mr. Friend again. Thank you, first of all, Mr. Walker, for that clarification. That helps. I'm inclined to support the motion. I would also support a motion that, if we didn't want to use those caveats, but just wanted to give a certain percentage increase. I'm inclined, and you can hear hesitation in my voice, to support the motion. It does concern me that, COVID aside, and it's because of COVID that I'm willing to do this, but we are increasing the enrollment of schools who've not met growth and have poor school rating. These pilots are up in 2 years, I believe. I guess I don't know that I'll be on CSAB in 2 or 3 years when the pilots are up for renewal, but I don't want to hear about how they were stressed out to serve these extra kids, and that's why they continue to have low performing and not meet growth. That's got to change whether we give them this increase or not.
Alex, this is Cheryl. The chat keeps going by, but I saw, and I can't get back to it, but I saw a chat, something from Martez saying 2 things. One had to do with a recommendation he was suggesting, and then the last one, if he could tell us what those two things were.
Board members, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I suggested that rather than look at a specific number, maybe allow the Cyber Academy to increase by 20%, consistent with the practice that I think the state board has implemented, and I think is consistent with the law. I also made a comment about whether we would be okay with the children enrolled in the second cohort, for lack of a better word, would be put back into the lottery. And I think we would be okay with that. I mean, we would have to message that appropriately and make sure we're able to, for lack of a better word, put a tag on this next group of kids. That said, I suggested that I hope that the advisory board and the state board would allow the cap to remain after this upcoming school year if our performance improves. Many of you may not know, but I assumed this role in March, and we've made some significant changes, both at the staff level, operationally and structurally. And I am confident that my team, comprised of our 3 principals and a whole list of support staff, are going to make a difference. Frankly, one of our focus points is to specifically manage, monitor, and incentivize specific activity on a weekly basis for the teachers, the learning coaches, and the kids. We are required to provide roughly 1,025 hours of instruction each year. And what we've tried to do is back that down to 30 hours a week, 6 hours a day, and provide specific examples of what purposeful activity for kids will be in order for them to learn. I mean, what we frankly found is that a lot of kids were not engaged, and we weren't monitoring that appropriately, or we weren't giving proper advice as to how to make that happen. So I think, those are just minimum steps I know will make a significant difference in children's lives. So those are just a couple of clarifying points, regarding some things that I put in the chat box.
Let's not put the cart before the horse about about whether this would be a cap that would continue on. I mean, I think that's something that the Charter School Advisory Board, when I'm long off of it, will be making the determination next year. But Mr. Chair, I mean, it's almost 11 o'clock. I'm hoping we can take a vote on this pretty soon.
Yeah, let's take a vote. So at this time, we'll take a vote. Ashley, will you read the motion, please?
Yes. So the motion is to, let me see, I typed something out. Recommend that enrollment at NC Virtual Academy and NC Cyber Academy be increased by the capacity limits set by the schools. In this case, Virtual Academy is 2,800 and Cyber Academy is 1,000. For any student that meets the following requirements: no full-time virtual school option in the student's district, no spot available in a district full-time virtual school, or a district is unwilling to provide services or internet service devices or internet services. Is that correct, Mr. Walker?
You said it more artfully than I did.
Great.
Stephen, I'm wondering if this motion might be cleaner if you remove the device component, because I think that adds a layer of complexity that might be difficult. And I don't know what the board's pleasure, but that would just be fine. I don't know how you feel about that. But.
Well, I mean, I don't, you know, if an LEA says, hey, you know, I'm thinking about the low income student here that doesn't have access to a quality device, doesn't have access to quality internet, and the LEA says, we got so many, we can't provide it for you. And the Virtual Academy say that they will. You know, Virtual Academy and Cyber say we will. Just making sure that they have that option, because, you know, Virtual Academy doesn't do you any good if you don't have a computer or internet.
Okay. All right, so let's have a vote.
Okay. I'm going to do a roll call vote. I have Stephen making the motion and Joel seconding the motion. All right, Jeanette Butterworth.
Aye.
Joel Ford.
Aye.
Bruce Friend.
Aye.
Lynn Kroger.
Aye.
Hilda Parlay.
Aye.
Alex Quigley.
Aye.
Sherry Reeves.
Aye with hesitation.
Cheryl Turner.
I'm not going to keep it from being unanimous, but I have serious hesitation, but I'll go with aye.
Okay. And Stephen Walker.
Aye, emphatically.
Okay. It unanimously passed.
All right. We need to talk about Elaine Reddick. So Ashley, could you pull up any information, and could we just jump right into that? I apologize for allowing the clock to run so long on that, but I think I'm hopeful that the scope of the discussion allowed us to explore all the possible issues and questions that we still have. And so in giving that recommendation and also leading us to a recommendation that is most strategic and you know, I will be able, if asked, will be able to articulate both the positives for why the board voted unanimously, as well as the reservation. So I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'm going to allow Claire Porter to discuss Elaine Riddick's RTO status at this point. Claire, are you available?
I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, this is Claire Porter from the Office of Charter Schools. I'll be very brief. I think we have Dr. Felton, Mr. McQueen, Mr. Adam Ezel, and other members of the board of directors of Elaine Riddick Charter School on the line. As you know, through the RTO process, this body, the CSAB, verifies that schools are ready to open. We are in a pandemic year. This is exceptional for many reasons. Our desire, of course, is to support all of our schools as they move up to opening. We always loop back with schools on enrollment, certificates of liability insurance, and the receipt of a temporary or permanent certificate of occupancy for their facilities. Despite the fact that we are opening in a virtual environment or Plan C for many schools, that does not negate the requirement that schools provide the office and CSAB with a certificate of occupancy for educational use. And in our conversation yesterday with Elaine Riddick and with what we have been provided, we had some concerns because they are stating they are opening in a virtual capacity on August 17th. And as Ms. Vaquero, I think, has presented to you, we have not yet received any type of either temporary or permanent ECO, so Educational Certificate of Occupancy, nor have we received not a binder, but an actual certificate of liability insurance from Elaine Riddick. I do want to bring the board up to speed. This morning, we did get an email, which I forwarded to Ms. Caro and Mr. Machado, saying that they hope to have the actual certificate of liability insurance over to us today. As of this morning, apparently there is a general contractor who has applied for some permitting, but Ms. Vaquero also sent you the email from Barry Overman, the fire marshal and the building inspector there in Paquimans County. And there was some very distinct concern that they would be able to acquire their educational certificate of occupancy on that facility. And there is the email right there. So again, concern that we're moving up to an opening here with all of the additional challenges the pandemic has presented, wanting fully to support this school, but wanting to also make sure that it is able to open with those things in place. I don't need to mention, as you all know, that the allotments division will not allow schools to draw down any funding prior to the delivery of a certificate of occupancy for educational use. And prior to commencing, and this needs to be in place prior to commencing operations. So it's not only to draw the funding down, but it literally has to be there prior to the first day of school. So that is it. Mr. Machado and Ms. Caro probably have some additional comments.
Yes, thank you, Claire. This again is Dave Machado. While our office and I personally want to support all of our charter schools, particularly the ones that are getting ready to open, we have had some concern about this school. I've heard from some local stakeholders that no records had been requested for students and that the building the permitting hadn't even started. So we had a conference call with Elaine Riddick leadership and Mr. McQueen to talk about these issues yesterday. There seemed to have been a flurry of activity yesterday and yesterday afternoon after our conversations. We were told at the beginning of the call that they were going to open up virtually on 8/17 and face-to-face on 8/31, and I think we all realized that that wasn't possible. Even though they wanted to open up remotely, we emphasized that they must have an educational certificate of occupancy in any location that they were going to go to operate and to receive funds. They did tell us that they had their contingency plan was several local churches in the area. Not sure if they've had any conversations with those churches yet. I look forward to hearing that. But we emphasize that those facilities had to have an educational certificate of occupancy. Our office is very concerned whether this school is ready to open up, and that's why we asked them to come before you today to explain what their situation is. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to hear from the school at this point.
Yes, the school and/or Mr. McQueen with the Torchlight EMO.
Good morning. This is Dr. Mary Shelton. I am the principal for the Elaine Riddick Charter School. Mr. McQueen, are you on the line? And we also have the chairperson, Ms. Powell. Ms. Powell, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Would you address this question and provide an update, please?
Well, I have not heard from Wayne. I'm sure he'll probably be on shortly. I'm trying to reach him now. He has more other, providing that I've just been appointed as the board chair to this board.
Tony Riddick, are you on the call? Adam, are you on the call? I'm not sure if they're hearing me.
Dr. Felton, this is Ashley Beccaro. I hear you. I do not see anyone other. I see Adam. I don't know. He's unmuted. I don't know if he's available. I do not see Mr. McQueen. Oh, he says he's trying to talk. Adam, you're unmuted. I do not hear you though.
Adam, would you provide an update to your knowledge? And Mr. McQueen?
Adam, you're not muted on my end, so maybe you want to check your end and make sure. Oh, looks like you dropped off.
I mean, is this Dr. Felton on the phone?
Yes, this is Dr. Felton.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I mean, honestly, you're going to be the director of the school, correct? Or are you the board chair?
No, I'm not the board chair. The board chair is Ms. Diane Powell.
You'll be the director?
Yes, I'm serving in the administrative capacity, yes.
You'll be the lead administrator?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so what can you tell us about the situation? Because as the administrator that's going to open the school, you should be able to comment on it.
I was waiting to receive an update based on the information that on the activities associated with the activities that happened yesterday. So where we are, to the best of my knowledge at this time, and as I stated, I am waiting for further information. I know that Mr. Riddick is supposed to be providing that certificate of occupancy until the building is ready, and we are, as indicated previously, desiring to continue. We've ordered Chromebooks and we've ordered devices. We have staff in professional development. So any other specific questions you have? I'm also, based on the information I've received, as indicated previously, you should be receiving the insurance documentation soon. I think that if we, and I believe, and I have confidence that Mr. Riddick will be producing that certificate of occupancy associated with the church. I think we are prepared to go forward.
Wait, the church, is that a different facility than the facility referenced in this?
Yes. Yes. And Mr. McQueen, are you able to join us? Were you able to join us to provide additional information regarding the activities that took place yesterday?
Dr. Felton?
Yes.
This is Ashley Beccaro from the Office of Charter Schools. Is the date for students to begin school, is that still set for the 17th, next Monday?
That's the current plan.
Okay. And what is current enrollment? Ms. Turner has asked that question.
I believe it's, Adam, are you there? I believe it's around 100, 115 approximately.
Board members, I feel like we extended a lot of grace with this school. We frankly went to bat at the state board in the face of some pushback, and I'm just frankly I'm just disappointed that we're in a situation now where we have a letter that building a non-educational facility is being converted, it's not ready, and then we're potentially going to be a different building. It just seems like this would warrant at this point to hit the pause button and delay the school opening at this.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you, but I'm going to take it a step further. Is Mr. McQueen their consultant?
Mr. Ford, this is Dave Machado. Mr. McQueen is the lead of the EMO that their school is partnering with.
Okay, so that further answers my question. He knows better. This is, Mr. Chairman, whatever recommendation that you want to make at this particular point, I want to support it. We cannot allow families, knowing what we know, to be put in this position on August the 17th.
Mr. Quigley, can I make a motion?
Evidently Alex is having issues. He's asked me to go ahead and take over. Please make a motion.
Ms. Turner, may I make a motion?
Please.
I'd like to make a motion that we recommend to the State Board of Education that Elaine Riddick take a 1-year delay because they are not ready to open.
And Hilda Perley seconds that.
Been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Go ahead. I'm looking here on the chat. This is Joel Ford. And is McQueen trying to speak and can't because of technical difficulties? Because I'm ready to support the motion, but go ahead.
Mr. Ford, this is Dave Machado. I just got a text from Mr. McQueen saying he's trying to get on. I'm going to call him on my cell and see if he can talk to you through my cell. Hold on 1 minute.
Let me say this to you, fellow board members, that Mr. McQueen and his management company dealing with charter schools, this is nothing new to him. Why he hasn't empowered his client, the administrator, the board, with this information at a minimum via email, and they should not have to solely rely on him. I don't know if he's a one-man shop or what, or if people are on vacation, or if the pandemic has them paralyzed. But this is too important for us to have to go to these things and put these families through this, as well as not equipping this staff to open this school. This is beyond frustrating.
And Mr. Joel, this is Hilda Perley. I concur.
Hold on. I just want
with you.
I have Mr. McQueen called me, so I have him on speaker now, just in case, so you can hear. Go ahead, Herbert.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, left off, and I did hear the frustration of the board. Is where I kind of came from. We just expect that this is a highly effective process that we're in right now. We're doing all that we can to move this process forward. Yes, we've run into a few challenges. Insurance is not one of them. The insurance certificate, as Ms. Porter pointed out, would be there today, and we're just, I actually thought this had already been done. The gentleman had sent over something by way of a temporary policy to allow us to do the work here. The other part of it, the construction concerns, we just had our challenges with various contractors and the like, but we are very close to having this all done. I left the inspectors this morning. They have all their drawings. They have all the information that they need to make a final decision to allow the building permits. We have all those things already in place. Building materials are already on site. Just waiting for the word from the inspectors.
Mr. McQueen, just question is, are we talking about the building? Because the principal was talking about a church facility. Which facility are we talking about?
Oh, we're talking about the main facility, the one I was speaking of.
What is
the church facility? Go ahead.
What is that facility?
The church facility, Riddick was working on securing one of the churches here in the area for one of the board members. He was on the call with me as well. We were trying to have an answer for that. He was going to share a little bit of information about the two churches we've looked at. So, but the caveat that they have to have a certificate of occupancy for education would be a challenge. When I spoke with the inspectors this morning, he doesn't see any place else in the county that currently has a certificate of occupancy for education that he could, come up with. With that in mind, we discussed with the board members and the director and all concerned parties that we may have to technically move the school's first day back to August 31st. Now, this is not something that's unusual. Anytime the school may have to adjust the date because of various components outside of their control as much as possible. And it's like any other business. You have a date, a launch date, a planned date, and it may not happen on that date. And regardless of who you are, whether you're GM or whether you're GER, you can still run into those challenges.
Okay.
But I think we're on the verge of overcoming all of those. These are not too, so far that I see it, not too, nothing that's insurmountable with a few more days.
Do we have a certificate of a COI for the church or liability insurance for the church? And do we have everything? I mean, it sounds like this city is not going to be ready to be open even.
Mr. Quigley, this is Dave Machado. We have not received any information on any kind of contingency location on the church. We don't know what the address would be. They have not provided anything. That was discussed yesterday in our call, but our office has not received anything. Can you confirm that, Ms. Porter?
Yes, Mr. Machado, this is Ms. Porter from the Office of Charter Schools. We did, in fact, have a conversation with their team yesterday regarding the two contingency facilities, and we suggested it might be prudent, given the delays, that they immediately attempt to get an educational COI for one or both of the, well, at least one of the contingency locations, seeing as we're coming up on the start of school. And it does not appear that the building, as Mr. McQueen said, will be ready. We did not get a renovation or construction schedule. We don't have any, we've gotten several promises, we've gotten quotes. We did not ever get an actual certificate of liability insurance. Like I said, this morning we had an email that it was in the works, but we actually don't have anything. And the greater issue is the COI. So, that's that.
Yeah. Can I also speak to that? And I do understand that the necessity and gravity of having that insurance. We have no students in the building. We have nobody in the building at all, except for construction workers when they come. And we do have a liability insurance to cover them. So before we have a first day of school, before anybody shows up to our building, of course, that will be in place. And like the gentleman said, probably as late as today. Now, charter school. And so that's what led to us having a discussion with the board and taking some, very difficult decisions about moving the first day of school back and running a camp during these first few weeks until we could get all our people in place.
Yeah, I'd also like to offer some suggestions as well. This is Tony, as it relates to this project. I think that rather than pause this or, extend this out for another year, I think that if we could give you a day-by-day update starting tomorrow morning, we'll be able to give you the 3 churches with contact information. I'll personally commit to give it to you, that has already given us permission to be in the church. The issue now is whether or not the church is going to be classified as an educational facility. I'd also like to add that, considering once again the state that we're in, I'm hoping that everybody can show some flexibility as it relates to this project. The last thing is that we have 130, maybe 135 students now that are registered and that are looking forward to the Elaine Riddick Charter School opening up on the 17th, or at least on the 31st. So if we could just pause and put a day-to-day update starting tomorrow with the progress, with the churches, with the insurance, and I think this will allow us to facilitate this process the way we all expect it to from the very beginning. But yes, we have been struggling with some difficulties. Some of those things Don McQueen has not vocalized, but I certainly like to do it, but this is not the setting for it. And there's certainly a lot of people in the community fighting against us not opening the school up because they know what the results will be. So if you would allow us to continue to update you on a day-to-day basis, I think that it would put us in a position that you can see that we'll be able to meet the deadlines. Anything but stop us. Please don't do that.
Alex, while you were out, there was a motion and a second that's currently on the table.
Okay, I was not aware. What is the motion for?
The motion was that we recommend that Elaine Riddick is not ready to open and that they take a delay year. The motion was given by Sherry, seconded by Hilda.
Okay. All right.
And Alex, I just have a comment on that. I am so upset just sitting here listening to this back and forth conversations that we've been having for months now. And we've got 3-4 people that don't even know when the first day of school is going to be. I really want to make the motion that we remove the possibility of opening this school. So I think a year delay is being very gracious.
Okay.
If I can respond, please. The back and forth is certainly necessary. I hate the fact that we're at this point, but I would like to also reiterate that we put a lot of work into this process, and we didn't put the work in to not open the school. And also, of the 130 students that we currently have that are registered, many of them have been totally approved for this school. Obviously, their parents are going to be disappointed because they've already made adjustments around it. All we're asking is simply, let's do a day-by-day update. We don't need to penalize the students. We don't need to penalize the board members. And any issues that we have with how the management team is conducting business, we can address that as well. But what we don't want to do is stop the school. I would recommend as a citizen, as a board member, that the motion be more in line with continuing to move forward with opening the charter school. And I'll say this as well, although Mr. McQueen has several other schools, we all understand that they know how to open schools. We've just had some delays that we didn't expect. For example, nowhere in the history of Hereford, North Carolina, has a person or group that came before the planning board had to sit for nearly 2 hours and be subjugated to the type of ridicule that we were subjugated to. Nowhere in the history of Hereford will you find anybody fighting as hard against the charter school. We understand why they're doing it. It has nothing to do with us not being capable of opening a charter school. It has more to do with the shame that the charter school will put on the public school because of the success. And I'm basing the success on the board members. I'm basing the success on the board members and nothing outside of that. And so I challenge the state board again today. Let us move forward with a day-to-day contingency plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Riddick. So we have a motion on the table. It's been properly moved and second. Any more discussion on the motion at this time? From board members. Right.
May I speak? This is Dr. Dodo. Can you hear me?
No, I think at this point, with a motion that's been properly moved and second, we've heard from outside parties. I'm just asking for board member participation at this. Any other board member comments? Okay, Ashley, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Right.
Okay. Jeanette Butterworth. Joel Ford. Joel Ford.
He's still on the line. So did I,
Oh, okay, great.
via the chat box.
Okay, Bruce Friend,
Aye.
Lynn Kroger,
Aye.
Hilda Parlay,
Aye.
Alex Quigley,
Aye.
Sherry Reeves. Aye. Cheryl Turner,
Aye.
Stephen Walker.
Aye.
Okay, it passes unanimously. This recommendation will go to the state board for a 1-year delay.
All right, at this time, is there any other items for the agenda today? I know we're significantly over time. Ashley?
No, not that I am aware of.
Okay, and
Do you have anything else?
what's the timeline for the state board? Because obviously the school has the opportunity, should they want a state board directly. When are we presenting these most recent recommendations from the advisory board?
Chairman Quigley, this is Dave Machado again. We're waiting on Dr. Deanna Townsend Smith to let us know when State Board is going to have another special call meeting. We're anticipating that maybe Friday or the first of next week to for these items. So as soon as Dr. Townsend Smith lets us know, I will let you know.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important that these folks know exactly what's going on, because obviously we have a lot of students involved. So that, if the board can move, obviously, as quickly as possible, and I'm sure they understand.
Yes, we did.
And specifically the state board as well, Dave. Given
I'm sorry, say again.
I was just saying that we need the state board to move quickly, and given the weight of the circumstances. Dave was saying Friday or Monday they'll probably meet. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. All right, Stephen.
I move we adjourn.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor, voice vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hilda.
Guys, good luck opening up.